Hi, and welcome to my rebuttal against the statement that all publicly funded palliative care or hospice settings be required to provide medical assistance in dying. Acronym MAID. Please read or listen to the following slides arguing against my opponent's 4 points, which I will review on the next slide. Here are the 4 arguments presented by my opponent, which I will rebut over the next 4 slides. Argument number 1 made by my opponent: constitutional protected legal rights to MAID, Bill C-14. Argument number 2, patients have the right to receive health care services without discrimination. Argument number 3, patients have the right to equitable access to all medically necessary health care services funded by the government. And argument number 4, patients have the right to care that respects the dignity of patients and their preferences with life-limiting illness. Rebuttal to argument number 1. Constitutional protected legal rights to MAID, Bill C-14. My opponent has stated that patients have constitutionally protected legal rights for MAID. This gives the patient a right to control over end-of-life care according to the principles of palliative care. While this is true from a legal point of view, that palliative care now includes both improved quality of life and symptom management and MAID, these are 2 very different ways to meet the goal of reducing suffering for a person. While one avenue provides care for a person through symptom management, the other provides death. There is a stark contrast between the 2 and therefore have varying implications. I agree with my opponent that autonomy and control are the right of people. However, I agree that it is not within the physician's job description to determine when and how a person dies. Furthermore, even though a patient has signed consent for MAID because legal legislation allows it, this does not address the ethical or moral side of such actions when considering other participants in the situation. I stand firm in my position that according to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, Section 2A, all Canadians have the right to freedom of conscience and religion. Just because cultural norms may shift to include death by suicide does not dictate that the desires or wishes of one person supersede the ethical viewpoint or morals of another human. Physicians and nurse practitioners and registered nurses who work anywhere should not be legislated to inform, offer, or assist with MAID if it is against their ethical or moral standing. Mandating through law that all publicly funded healthcare institutions provide MAID is a direct violation of the Charter and rights and freedom for those who cannot consciously participate in MAID. The second argument made by my opponent is that all patients have the right to receive healthcare services without discrimination. My first contention to this statement is that death by assisted suicide strikes at the very nature of ethics itself. I feel bold enough to state that even if we took away the word all and said some publicly funded palliative care or hospital settings provide MAID, offering death to another human is ethically demoralizing. It is not a matter of discrimination against a patient who desires death by suicide, but a right of all human beings under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to think and behave in a conscious way. Human life and dignity are not dependent on finding worth or reason or purpose. Human life is in itself a gift, and we are not, as medical professionals, entitled to take it away from someone else. My second contention is that even if you did believe that people have the right to choose death when suffering, it is against the right of others who do not agree and therefore should never be implemented as a mandate that all publicly funded institutions provide MAID. Publicly funded palliative care and hospital settings also include faith-based institutions, where care providers need to be comfortable to have conscientious objections accepted. Rebuttal to argument number 3 by my opponent. My opponent's third argument stands: patients have a right to equitable access to all medically necessary healthcare services funded by the government. I contend that just because there is funding for people who receive MAID does not make it ethically or morally right. Healthcare workers cannot be expected to give up their religious, ethical, and moral rights to provide a service that is funded but impinges on their own rights. Some may argue that physicians, NPs, and RNs must provide services if they are funded because they have a duty to the patient. However, this does not align with the previous mentioned Universal Declaration of Human Rights. One person's desires for such grievous actions as requesting death may not supersede the moral and ethical standards of another human. Rebuttal to argument number 4 made by my opponent. While I agree that constitutional rights are also important to Canadians, I think it is important to remember where constitutional rights fall under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was originally published in 1948. The constitutional rights of Canadians are intended to support people living in a certain country, and human rights are universal and upheld for all people, no matter where they live. More importantly, though, I will highlight here that the fundamental freedoms included in the Canadian Charter include: A. Freedom of conscience and religion. B. Freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. C. Freedom of peaceful assembly. And D. Freedom of association. Ethically speaking here, a physician, NP, or RN has rights that support their right to deny offering MAID in any capacity, from offering MAID information to administering the lethal dose of medication. Please stay tuned for the conclusion for our rebuttal closing remarks, which will be posted June 20th. Thank you for listening and/or watching.